The last prophet in the Christian arrangement of the Old Testament is the prophet Malachi. His name means messenger, and an approximate date of his ministry is around 435 B.C., about a century after the Hebrews had returned from the Babylonian captivity and reconstructed the temple. What is the main point of the book? Well, Malachi is calling the people of God back to holiness in preparation for the coming Messiah. 100 years earlier, when the people returned from Babylonian captivity and began working on the temple, their spirits were at an all-time high. They were finally back home and finally rebuilding the temple. The problem was with their expectations. They expected the Messiah to come immediately and reside in the temple, freeing them from foreign oppression and ruling over them in the spirit and power of King David. None of these things happened. In Malachi's day, they were still under foreign rule. They still have no Davidic king and still no Messiah. Their zealousness for worshiping God had waned significantly through the years. Malachi's mission is to correct the errors that had crept up and call the people back to the true and living God by reminding them of His goodness and the fact that the Messiah was coming. Well, what were the people doing that was so bad? Well, the priests in particular were abusing the responsibility they had as God's intermediaries with the people. They were breaking the Mosaic law by offering leftover garbage to God. God addresses this in chapter 1. In verse 7, God states, "You embarrass me by offering worthless food on my altar." And then he clarifies on how they were doing this exactly in verse 8. He says, "But isn't it wrong to offer animals that are blind, crippled, or sick?" In Leviticus chapter 1, verse 3, God clearly states that bulls or rams or goats are the animals to be used for these sacrifices, and it must not have anything wrong with it. Well, this was not what the priests were doing. The priests also were profaning the altar of God by saying, "What's so great about the Lord's altar?" in Malachi chapter 1, verse 7. This careless attitude by the priest had a negative impact on the people, as Malachi chapter 2, verse 8 tells us, "Your teachings have led others to do sinful things, and you have broken the agreement I have made with your ancestor Levi." God then turns his attention to the people in general. They were abusing the marriage covenant by divorcing their spouses and marrying foreign people and taking up worship of their false gods. This was a problem that had continued to plague Israel all throughout their history in Scripture. In Malachi chapter 2, verse 16, God says, "I hate divorce." In chapter 3, God addresses another sin the people were committing, neglecting the tithe. The tithe was the 10% of the income that the people were commanded to give back to God. Obviously, being stingy in this offering reflects a poor condition of the heart. And God takes this so seriously that he calls it robbery in Malachi chapter 3, verse 8. He asks, "Will a man rob God? And yet you are robbing me. But you say, how have we robbed you?" The answer is in tithes and offerings. The book ends on a positive note for the faithful, however, as in the first few verses of chapter 3, God declares that the Messiah will be coming. Malachi chapter 3, verse 1, "I, the Lord all-powerful, will send my messenger to prepare the way for me. Then suddenly the Lord you are looking for will appear in his temple. The messenger that you desire is coming with my promise, and he is on the way." This is good news for the faithful, as God reminds us later in chapter 3. "You people are precious to me, and when I come to bring justice, I will protect you, just as parents protect an obedient child." Chapter 4 closes the book with a reminder to all that the day of judgment is coming, and the righteous and wicked will be separated according to their deeds.